Okay, I want to talk about some kind of seemingly wonky stuff, but this is really important. This is the core stuff of government. And what I'm talking about is the D.C. Circuit Court and the filibuster. Now, let me explain how this works. You have the Supreme Court. Everybody knows the Supreme Court. You know, it's basically our constitutional monarchy. Below the Supreme Court, there are a group of what are called federal appeals courts or federal district courts that can feed a case to the Supreme Court or not. Sometimes they're not appealed to the Supreme Court. And most of them are numbered, but there is one that is not. It's the District of Columbia Court. And the Federal Circuit Court for the District of Columbia is the most important of all of these courts. And here's why. When you sue and the lawsuit gets all the way up to just below the Supreme Court, it's getting to one of these circuit courts. It's getting to one of these district courts and these appeals courts. And it has to be in the right court. It has to be in the court for that jurisdiction. So if you're dealing with a case that has to do with BP, you'd probably be in whatever, I think it's the third, fourth, fifth, whatever it is, the circuit court down in Louisiana. If you're dealing with a case that happens in California, it'll be the Ninth Circuit. Something that has to do with California law or the constitutionality of whatever it may be. But if your lawsuit has to do with federal laws are made in Washington, D.C., and they are enforced out of Washington, D.C., out of the executive branch, the president's office, through agencies that are part of the executive branch, the EPA, the Department of Labor, the Food and Drug Administration, the USDA. All of these agencies are creations of the federal government. And when the banking, much of the banking oversight, when these agencies are challenged, when some guy or company that owns a coal-fired power plant comes along and says, you don't have the right, EPA, to regulate how much mercury or poison I'm dumping into the air out of my smokestack. That goes to the D.C. Circuit Court because it's about a federal regulation. So federal regulations pretty much aren't litigated anywhere else in the United States except in this one court, the D.C. Circuit Court. And up until about 3 or 4 months ago, for a long time, the Republicans held a majority on that court. It's 4-3. Now there's 12 seats on that court, I believe. 11 seats. 11. Thank you, Shana. It is wonderful having a guy who's actually a law school graduate as my associate producer who can whisper in my ear from time to time. Thank you. So there's 11 seats on the D.C. court, but only 7 of them were filled. 4 by Democratic appointees. By Republican appointees, 3 by Republican appointees. And a few months ago, President Obama successfully appointed Sri Srinivasan, I believe is how his name is pronounced, to that court. So now it's evenly split, Democratic and Republican. But some of the Democrats are a little conservative, and all of the Republicans are just total right-wing whack jobs. So there's these 3 empty seats. And President Obama has nominated, over the last 3 weeks, Patricia Millett, Nina Pollard, and now Robert Wilkins to this court, to the D.C. court. Robert Wilkins, there was just a vote on this yesterday or the day before. He got 53 votes, which means he should have been on the court. It takes more than 50%. There's 100 senators. 50 senators plus the vice president, or 51 senators, should get you on the court. And he got 53 votes. But the Republicans filibustered it. And to overcome a filibuster, you have to have 60 votes. Same thing with Patricia Millett. She passed. She was filibustered. Same thing with Nina Pollard. She passed. She was filibustered. Nobody is questioning the credentials of any of these people. These are highly qualified nominees to the court. Senator Elizabeth Warren said, and I quote, We need to call out these filibusters for what they are: naked attempts to nullify the results of the last presidential election, to force us to govern as though President Obama had not won the 2012 election. And then she went on to say, if Republicans continue to filibuster these highly qualified nominees for no reason other than to nullify the president's constitutional authority, then senators not only have the right to change the filibuster rules, senators have the duty to change the filibuster rules. We cannot turn our backs on the Constitution. We cannot abdicate our oath of office. Now, up until very recently, what we're talking about here is something called the nuclear option, which is basically saying, the Senate is going to change its rules. Harry Reid would have to initiate this. The Senate is going to change its rules. And oddly enough, it only takes 51 votes in the Senate to change the rule that allows 40 Republicans to require 60 votes on things. You following me? The filibuster, in other words, the Republicans insisting on 60 votes. And Democrats don't have 60 votes, so that means the Republicans can always stop things. That rule can be changed with 51 votes. The rules of the Senate are subject to a majority. That's in the Constitution. So Harry Reid can basically say, okay, I want to have a vote on whether or not we're going to do away with the ability of anybody to filibuster at least judicial nominees. Now, this isn't a full nuclear option. This is just for judicial nominees. And Dianne Feinstein and many of the other kind of conventional, mainstream, big-name Democrats have been opposed to this up until recently. Dianne Feinstein just came out in favor of it, or at least saying she'd seriously consider it. Elizabeth Warren is obviously in favor of it. In fact, so far, the only guy that we know who's really outspokenly opposed to this is Carl Levin, the Democrat from Michigan. I think this is vital. The president needs to put his appointees on this court, because this court makes the decisions about about the EPA, about the Department of Labor, about your right to organize, about your right to have clean air, clean water, about, just all kinds of things. This court makes those decisions. And the president not only should have the right, the Constitution gives him the right, with a majority of the Senate consenting, that's 51 senators, to have his nominees on that court. And the Republicans are saying no, not because these are bad people, but simply because it's President Obama putting them forward. This is wrong.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So I am calling, I don't have a senator, but I'm making some phone calls suggesting that it's time to pull the nuclear option, at least with regard to judicial nominees. You may want to think about the same.